We are back with episode 4 of the top 100 albums of the 21st century. This time, counting down number 70 to 61. We're getting there, folks, based on your votes. And hopefully, this episode will be better than the last one. But, it's all a democracy here. So this will be fun talking about it with my friend Nathaniel Ahart, as always. Thanks for being on, man.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And to your point, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of mixed on like half this episode, so just warning you ahead of time. This is I feel this is gonna be very divisive for me, and the choices that are on this episode. But there are some great albums on this one as well. Maybe some of the best we've gone over yet. So something to look forward to, I suppose.
Okay, well, let's get right to it. At number 70.
Yankee Hotel Foxtrot by Wilco from the year 2002. This album, look, I'm going to be honest. When I first got into Wilco, I don't really like their first two albums. And if I had listened to it before the 90s list, Summer Teeth would have made the list. I think that's a great record, and
I wish
I
it
think,
had. Yeah.
Yes, and I think the fact that I didn't put it on the '90s list, I'm atoning for my sins in a different way for a different album. We'll get into that later. But yeah, this was obviously a huge sonic leap for the band. Of course, Jeff Tweedy and the gang, especially Jay Bennett, incorporating a lot more electronic sounds and a lot more interesting stuff such as strings. You got a bunch of bells playing throughout this entire album. Really, really interesting instruments all throughout, and really leaning into the more experimental side of their work on so many awesome songs in here. Like Camera is one of the hookiest songs on there. It's almost like Beach Boys-esque and how melodic it is. You could say that about stuff off of Summer Teeth as well. War on War, I think, is awesome with the really fuzzy synthesizers that come in on that song. I absolutely love it. Jesus, Etc., I think is one of the best ballads Jeff Tweedy has written. And in the string section that comes in on this section, see, they're pulling from all these different musical backgrounds and different sounds that make this album such a classic. Heavy metal drummer, lamenting about the days of innocence and them making fun of heavy metal bands on the beach while the girls are getting together with them, and they're just kind of being sort of, wallowing in their own pity, I suppose. But it's such a bright song for something that's so kind of melancholic in a way. Pot Kettle Black's great. I'm the Man Who Loves You. You could go on and on. I think, honestly, I don't understand, and I know you might feel a different way about this. I don't really understand anyone not saying this is a great album. I think this is undeniably a great album, but one that I don't think you can say is amazing either. I'm really kind of in the middle on this in that sense. But I still think, like, if it weren't for the fact that the last song on this album goes on for 7 minutes long, and like 5 minutes of it is like, I don't know if it's 5 minutes, but a good portion of it's just like kind of radio silence and static. Mm-hmm. I probably would love this album. It's so close to me loving this record. And I do think Summer Teeth might be their greatest accomplishment, but this just is so close by a hair, and I can see why when this came out was really quite interesting. And I think another thing is too, and I felt this about all of their albums, I think some of the chord progressions are a bit mid, you could say, but I think the musical arrangements themselves are what really kind of make a lot of these songs interesting. I think some of these ones get a little bit dull, which is why I'm not fully in love with this. But hey, I can't blame you guys for putting this on the list. If I had heard it before I made my list, it would have made mine as well, and it would have been even higher. But as it stands, I think, this is a decent spot. It's an undeniable classic, and I'm glad to see Wilco make the list.
Yeah, I'm glad Wilco made the list, and I do think this is a solid album. Like you, I do like Summer Teeth more. I think it's just more of a fun album, and like really has no weak moments whatsoever. Whereas this one, I felt at the time may have been a little overrated. It was like at the top of everyone's album.
Yeah, it's
of the
not
year
quite
list.
that good.
And yeah, I mean, there was a lot better stuff, I think, even in 2002. But that being said, Wilco is just, I think, a tremendous band, and still somehow, I think, a little underrated in what they
Sure,
do.
yeah.
Jeff Tweedy, I think, is just such a great songwriter. And even his voice, I feel like, he has that kind of folksy alt country thing going
It's like
on, but
almost
then
Jerry Garcia-esque.
yeah, but
Yeah.
then they borrow from all these other influences, like you said, the Beach Boys, and you can hear definitely some more electronic things, and then those influences creeping in on this album as well. So yeah, I'm really glad this is here. Didn't make my list, but I can
Sure.
see why it would have made a lot of people's as well. So
And I just want to say, like, the you can really tell, like, he was in a very dark place with his drinking at this point, and it reads through all across this album, him dealing with his insecurities. And I think that might be a reason, once again, besides the electronic, pushing the boundaries of what can be done in rock and electronic music at the time. I think it really stands out because it's sort of relatable. Even though some of the lyrics are a bit abstract, I think you can really feel like this is coming from a genuine place of sort of despair, and it's sad, but it's beautiful at the same time.
yeah, definitely. Well, great pick, guys. So that's going to bring us now to number 69. Lateralus by Tool from 2001. Yeah, Tool, I think we had them on the last countdown,
Hmm.
and I wasn't as thrilled about that album. But I just listened to this for the first time last week, and I have to say, I was surprisingly really just I enjoyed this all the way through, and it kind of, I don't know, it took me by off guard because especially the runtime, which it's 80 minutes. I thought, at some point I'd be like checking my watch, but I really enjoyed this all the way through. Of course, there were several songs that I did recall hearing back in the day, like Schism, with that bass line, that doom doom doom. It's like they've really carved out their own sound at this point, and I feel like their sound expounded a little bit too here. Like I feel like Adam Jones on guitar like discovered the wah pedal on this album, and that really gave some cool sonic textures and soundscapes on a lot of these songs. Parabola, a standout, of course. The title track, Ticks and Leeches, I think is a really strong track. That even though it's over 8 minutes in length, it builds to some crazy heights with James Keenan giving a really impressive scream on this. Of course, he's known for being a great vocalist. I've never been that crazy about him, but I think this is them at the top of their game, and I can see why it made the list.
Well, it's funny you say you like it more than the last one, Enema. Because I don't really. Look, I
Yeah,
respect these guys musically. I think they're super talented, especially Adam Jones on guitar. What a crazy guitarist, as you said, with the wah
yeah,
pedals. Some really great sonics on this album. I think they became a little bit more accessible on this. It's still really out there in weird, but it definitely
yes.
feels more radio friendly, and not in a bad way, but I do feel like there's like less experimentation on this album. But my goodness, there's some really great stuff on here. I especially love Parabola. Is probably my favorite track, and just the way he's talking about death is really really cool. There's some really cool tracks on here. Even like the instrumental triad, I think is
Hmm.
really cool.
Yeah.
It's like you can really respect the driving force and just thrashing sound of this band. But I'm gonna say it. I've said it before. I'm gonna say it again. I think prog is like the most pretentious subgenre of music, and I think this goes way too long. I think it's very indulgent in a way, and I'm not surprised by this band. I'm not a fan, honestly, of Maynard James Keenan just screaming, especially on The Patient. It's like it's impressive what he's able to do, but I'm not into that sort of thing, and yeah, it just kind of grates. my ears when I hear it. But I really like the opening track, The Grudge, as well. It goes
Oh
on a
yeah,
little
that's
bit
a
too
strong
long.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I was like, that's a really good way to kick off this album.
Hmm.
And then you had the whole weird thing at the end with like the aliens in Area 50. And I'm like, what is this? It's just kind of it's a little too much if you ask me.
Right.
It's very indulgent, but I can respect it musically. I'm not huge on it. It's not a bad choice at all, but yet again, it's just another one where I'm kind of like, okay, cool. Like you guys like it, sure, I guess. But I don't know. I think Enema was much more explorative sonically, and I think they covered a lot more ground musically, which is why I see that as the superior album. But as it stands, I mean, it's a pretty decent record nonetheless, and I can see why you guys like it a lot.
Yeah. Well, great pick, guys. So now at number 68. Death Consciousness by Have a Nice Life from 2008. This is an album that I was not aware of whatsoever before this countdown. So I just listened to it recently. And this is, for those who don't know, it was an independent album that was released by these two guys, Dan Barrett and Tim McCouga, who recorded this all on their own somewhere in Connecticut. And, I would describe it, I guess, as like indie lo-fi, kind of shoegaze a little bit, post rock.
Definitely.
And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by a lot of the stuff on here, especially towards the beginning. I found a lot of it very hypnotic, and um, the kind of stuff that you could see like being a little bit cinematic. Actually, like I could see some of these songs, like
Sure.
a quick one before the eternal worm devours Connecticut, the opening track. Blood Hail was a standout. Hunter I thought was really good. Um, I'm looking at the tracks right now. I can't remember all of them, but I did feel like side there it's separated into two halves. It's essentially a double album. The first half is called The Plow That Broke the Plains. Second half is The Future. It is long, which is to be expected for a double album, so I can't really fault it that much, but it does really start to feel its length by the second half, in my opinion. So I think if it had been a little more concise, I could have liked this more. I do appreciate what they're going for, especially as, an independent artist, what they were able to accomplish. Like, essentially just releasing this on their own, and over time it becoming a cult classic, essentially, is really impressive. And to see it end up on this list, kind of a cool thing, but didn't make mine, obviously. So,
No, I was aware of this album beforehand, and we have to thank the internet for that and all you indie music
yeah.
lovers. Look, it's better than background music, but definitely not better than Joy Division. I'm just gonna put that out there. But look, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of shoegaze. That's another genre that I think is very overrated in some ways. But what I will say, I think I almost understand now like why people like this music, because there's certain tracks on here that I think the way it builds, as you said, it's hypnotic in a lot of spots. Like at the 30-minute mark of the Big Gloom, where the guitars come really compressed and blasted into oblivion. I mean, that I was like, whoa, like this is awesome, and I really
some really
was
good
picking up.
guitar work on this album
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
absolutely, and
Mhm.
and or something like the Hunter, or just Hunter as it's called. That probably was my favorite track on this album, and I could hardly understand the lyrics, though I could tell that there was something there, and I was just so blown away by the cacophonous sound that's built on the song. It's almost 10 minutes long, but it really is all worth all that length. And then of course you have songs like on the second half, like Holy Fucking Shit 40,000, which features this really cool electronic bleeps over like this really smooth guitar groove and distorted vocals. And I think the second half, it introduces like a very heavy, abrasive, distorted guitars that pound in your ear like you're in hell. And I
Yeah.
think in that sense that's very effective because I believe this is a concept album about like them murdering God or something like this cult that's like out to murder God, and therein lies the problem because this is a very very well thought out concept album. I guess there's like a 17-page like booklet or something. I don't know exactly what the length is, but it's very well detailed. Like these guys really went out of their way to construct this, and that brings me to the point like if you have something so brilliant, why wouldn't you like make it more apparent in the mix what it's about? Because like I don't understand writing lyrics for something that you're not even going to hear, and I understand that this is a very very
Yeah, the
elaborate
voices are
record.
mixed really low.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I can see how you can still get into it musically, but at 85 minutes, I'm like, okay, we need to wrap this up. And I probably when it comes to shoegaze, I probably like Loveless a little bit more than this because it's shorter, and I think there's some it kind of pushed things forward a little bit more. Sorry, John.
I understand that. Yeah. No,
But hey,
Loveless is just more grating to me, not to like get into that, but yeah.
I think the heights on here are better than Loveless, but I think this just is just dragged out. It's not bad. I did enjoy this album, but at the same time, it's one of those albums where I'm like, yeah, it is what it is. It's impressive musically, but I just think that it could have been so much better. But then again,
Sure.
I'm not huge on shoegaze, so whatever. It's not a bad album. I get the appeal of it, but yeah,
Yeah.
I don't. I'm not going to listen to this again for 85 minutes. So
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we're in the same boat. It's like okay
yeah,
for what it is, but yeah, I didn't hate it. So,
definitely appreciate the musicality. That's
yeah.
really cool.
Right. All right. Well, good pick, guys. So now that's going to bring us to number 67.
Yo, MF Doom. Mr. Fan.
Food by none other than MF Doom from 2004. Oh my goodness, guys. Okay, so this is why I love doing this countdown, right? Because I had heard Mad Villainy before we got into this, and it made my list, but I hadn't really gotten into Doom in the way that a lot of people have. And so I was going through his discography, and my goodness, this is like literally the best discovery of this entire countdown. And I knew Doom was a great rapper, but I didn't know that he was like the greatest rapper who ever lived. If you ask me, no one flowed like he would just hop on a beat. It did not matter. He would hop on any beat and he would just come up with these crazy ass rhyme schemes, like rhyming like 10 different things within like the same stanza, and
He is
sometimes within the
amazing. Yeah.
single line. It's incredible, and he does it in such a laid back way that feels so relatable and yet feels so it feels like verbal assault almost, but it's just it's so amazing what Doom did as a rapper. And I think this album especially because I think this is where his skills as a producer really showed, because obviously you had Vaudeville Villain, which I will say is my favorite MF Doom record. I think it's one of the best hip hop albums of all time.
Same here.
Yeah, exactly, man. I don't think this is quite better than this, but you saw like on that he wasn't doing all the producing, and then on obviously with Mad Villainy it was Mad Lib, but here he's doing all the producing, and just the way he cuts up like all these, he samples the Spider-Man animated series, he samples the Fantastic Four, he even samples Sesame Street at some point, Scooby-Doo, Fist of the North Star. I mean, it's crazy how he's pulling all these samples from these cartoons and like integrating him into hip-hop music. I don't think anyone ever did that, and it really was Doom's trademark besides the mask, obviously, that which I love the fact that he wore the mask because he didn't want to make it about the image. He wanted to make it about the music, and he ironically created one of the most iconic images in hip hop. It's just so awesome. But my goodness, the fact that this whole album is based around food metaphors, because it is a concept album of sorts, but thematically it's not really about food. He just integrates these metaphors in very interesting ways. From the opening track, Beef Rap, which I will say I'm not as big of a fan as like of some of the cartoon samples. I think sometimes you utilize well, sometimes they because for me I just want to hear Doom rap. because he was like the best to ever do it. But the fact that he's like relating beef rap to like his dissatisfaction with the hip hop industry as a whole, and all the kind of in argument. I think there were kind of some shots taken at 50 Cent here was like talking about these rappers going shirtless, and then he makes a joke about Chippendale, which is just hysterical. Like the fact Doom always said, like, I saw an interview he did with Red Bull Academy where he's like, I wanted my rhymes, I want to give them something that's like really tactful, but I want to surprise them and catch them off guard with every single rhyme, and he does that so many times on this. But just thematically, it's great too. Potholders, I think Count Bass D outshines him on that song. I think one of the best verses on this album. Deep Fried Friends, with that sample that just lives rent free inside my head, that and just how he's talking about, you know, we've seen people explore this before, where, you know, the backstabbers in you know, that kind of either use you for your fame or your status to get somewhere, and the way he puts this on wax is just so mind-blowing. Once again, the rhyme after rhyme after rhyme after rhyme. I will say I'm not as huge a fan of the skits in the middle about food, like poop putt platter, Filet-O wrapper, gumbo, and then the fig leaf bicarbonate. But this album, every time Doom is on, it's just absolutely incredible. Like, Con Carne is amazing. Con Queso is probably my favorite song here. Probably the greatest rapping I've ever heard in my life from anybody.
Con Queso is great, yeah.
It's like, oh my goodness, how is he coming up with this stuff? Rap Snitch Kitches with Mr. Fantastic is such a great standout. Another amazing sample, and probably the most well-known off of this album, because I've like heard someone sample in like a TikTok or something. Like, did they just sample MF Doom? Like, it's like crazy. I'm picking up on this stuff now. Vomit Spit, Cookies. I mean, I could get into the lyrics on this thing, but I just think you have to listen to this to even do it justice. This easily is the best discovery I've made on this list, and I'm so glad that I've become such a massive Doom fan after going through his discography. I think that this should have been on my list, because I think this is one of the best albums we've ran into so far, and I think it should be a lot higher on this list.
Yeah, I mean, MF Doom, I'm with you as far as like being introduced to an artist, because I had only heard of him and I hadn't gotten into him. I agree with you. Vaudeville Villain is incredible. That album, especially from a production standpoint. This one, while I do appreciate it, and I agree with everything you said as far as, you know, MF Doom, definitely one of the most talented rappers out there, and it's apparent on here, just every song that he's rapping on. But also, I would say, you know, some of the samples aren't that great, and the production, I think, isn't that impressive when you compare it to an album like Vaudeville Villain or some of the others. But that being said, the fact that he did this by himself is pretty damn impressive. So wouldn't have made my list, but I'm definitely easing into calling myself an MF Doom fan as well. So,
but I disagree with you saying it's not as good. I do like the production on Vaudeville Villain more, but dude, like, even if you don't like the cartoony sample, like, it's still impressive how he builds a character out of this stuff. You know what I mean? And as I said, like this, I especially love the with the Friends on Deep Fried Friends. I forgot the group, but I think it's the Houdini sample that they use. Is so cool. But my goodness, I mean, just what a loss. You know, just a legend we lost way too soon. I mean, can you imagine if this guy was still making music? Because you know he would, and you know it would be great.
And he'd be very prolific. So,
he still is, and I think he's one of those guys that luckily got his roses in his lifetime, and I'm glad that you know, after all the trials that he went through, he was able to create something so lasting and impactful, and everyone sees him as one of the greats. Yeah. I know I certainly do.
Great pick, guys. So that's going to bring us now to number 66.
I've been going through something.
Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick Lamar from 2022. Yes, the first appearance of Kendrick Lamar on this list. Should come no surprise that he's on the list. but I'm a little surprised this album made the list, because look, this last year, this is like the album I was like, this is going to be the best album of the year. I'm so hyped. I've never been more excited for an album in my life, probably. And then I heard it, and I was like, I've never been so disappointed listening to an album in my and that's not to say that the whole thing is bad, because I think this album, obviously I did a review on it back when it came out. I think this album is simultaneously an artist putting themselves on blast in a way that I've never heard, and some of the most soul-bearing songs that Kendrick has ever written, and some of his most genius as well. But it also is an artist selling out to the most common denominator in a way that feels just so musically bland and uninteresting and quite frankly awful. And so, as an album, I really don't see why this, like, above MF Doom, really, but look, let me get into some of these tracks here. I think We Cry Together is one of Kendrick's most ambitious tracks, and it really reminds me of Kim off of Marshall Mathers LP. And I think it features a great feature from Taylor Page, the actress, who she's been great in so many things the past few years. And you can tell she's acting her ass off in a way that it's like she's almost rapping, but she's literally just acting. And it's this confrontation between her and Kendrick and about infidelity, and the way it goes about is really some of the most intense stuff I've ever heard in any Kendrick song, and any hip-hop song for that matter. I think one of the standouts on here. I also think the opening track, United in Grief, where Kendrick's kind of dealing with his daddy issues, and him like kind of teaching him to be very emotionally closed off, and the abuse, the emotional kind of what's neglect that he experienced from his father. That's the thing. He really gets in a lot of great ideas, and then you get songs like N95 and Die Hard and Purple Hearts, which I think has one of the worst features from Summer Walker, where she says, if it ain't love if you don't eat my ass, or something to that effect. I'm like, and then there's another song, I forgot which one, because I think Crown I remember being pretty awful as well. But there's one song where Kendrick says, I can't please everybody 33 times in a row. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you do that, no shit, Sherlock. And I don't mean to disrespect Kendrick, because I think he's one of the all-time greats, but I mean, of course I will mention Auntie Diaries, which I think his deconstruction of gender politics, and especially, using his own past, of course, of the incident where the white girl said the N-word at his concert, and the way he's kind of looking back on that incident with more maturity, and the way he feels conflicted about his past. It's really, really great. I think Mr. Morale is amazing, and so Mother I Sober, some of the most really gut wrenching things I've ever heard from any artist, talking about his past in a way that no one should have had to go through what he did, and I think this was more of a therapy session for him. But I just think this album is so inconsistent to the point where I don't think it works as an album. I think individual tracks are genius, but this is not the worst album on the list if you ask me, but I certainly don't understand why this is here. And honestly, I think it's overrated as hell, and I don't think it should be on the list.
Yeah. Aside from Lingua Ignota, I would say this is probably my second least favorite album we've discussed this far. And I'm going to really go on a limb here and say something that may get people mad at me, but I'm just going to say it. I think Kendrick Lamar is one of the most overrated artists that's out there today.
You're wrong about that, but not about this album particularly.
That being said, I do think he's very talented, especially at rapping. He's just not my cup of tea, but just a lot of the subject matter, and like, whereas you loved the track that had the skit in it, We Cry Together,
basically was kind of a whole skit in a way.
Yeah, like, I just did not enjoy it, like, especially just like how mean-spirited it is. And I don't know, like, I think that what the reason I say he's overrated is because, like, he's just at this point a critical darling, like one of
Okay,
those
sure.
where it's like when you look at the grades for this, like if you're looking on
Yeah.
anything, like it's like they're giving him 9 out of 10s for this album, and it's like, are you listening to the same thing I am? Because
Right.
it's, and one could argue like the same thing about like Radiohead, for example. It's like they get to a certain level, and then it's just like the critics love them no matter what they do. For them, I think they are not overrated, but for this guy, especially for this album in particular, I just don't get it, man.
I
Don't see why it's made the list.
I agree to disagree with the point where you're saying about him being a critical darling, where they'll basically just throw praise at him for whatever. And I certainly feel that way about this album. I can't believe how high the score is on this. I think this should, if this was around like a 7 out of 10 or something, I'd be like, okay, I understand that. But because I still think that some of these tracks are brilliant, and even if you don't like that song, because it's not your cup of tea for that song, I mean, the lyrics are like, it's impressive. You know what I mean? From a structural standpoint, I've never heard anything like it. Even Kim is not even quite. They do what, but then again, I still feel like there's a purpose for it being mean spirited, because he's kind of reflecting like his own, relationship that he has with his partner Whitney, which is crazy. The fact that it's like he put this on record. Like, that's why it's like, whoa, man. But I really hope at the very least, so Kendrick making this album, he was able to kind of conquer his own demons. And I think if there's any positive I can pull out of this album, because I do like this album, but it's just so inconsistent for its own good. But I really do hope
like you like it.
Because some the worst songs on here are fucking terrible. Mm-hmm. I really mean it, but I think, I really hope that Kendrick has been able to get to a better place in his life. And I think the ending of this album kind of leaves me feeling that he has. And I can't say, I can't speak for him, obviously, because I don't know Kendrick. But I really hope that that is the case. I love and respect Kendrick. I really do. But this album is just, it's not as good as everyone says it is. I think it's very overrated.
Yeah, and I don't know Kendrick either, but if word gets to him that I said he's overrated, please don't kill me. So now, without further ado, let's get to number 65.
Scaring the Hoes by JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown from 2023, the newest album on this list, and the only one from this year, I believe. But I remember when this came out, made some big waves. Obviously, JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown have been putting in the work for the past 10 years. And I am quite a fan of Danny Brown, but I haven't really gotten to JPEG Mafia yet. So this was the first time listening to him. And my goodness, I gotta say, I mean, it's actually kind of incredible what he was able to accomplish on this album. Because one thing that's really interesting, he produced this on a Roland SP44SX, which is like this old machine that they would use in the 90s. And basically, so this is all done like with analog.
Yeah.
Which is crazy listening to this production. He said something to the effect, he said it in a much more collected way, but he was basically like, fuck that shit, I'm using Pro Tools from now on. Because you can tell, like, even though this album's 36 minutes, it's like, every single track is so dense with so many different samples, so many weird.
Crazy, yeah.
It's like the most
way.
Yeah, it's like the most anti-pop thing I've ever heard, but it's like really, really impressive what they do here. Right from the beginning with Lean Beef Patty, which is not my favorite song on here, but certainly sonically it really sets you off right from the get. Step a Pig is one of my favorites, I think, is well. Definitely one of the best. I think Fentanyl Tester is just absolutely incredible with the Kellis sample at the end, which is so bizarre, and just them rapping, it's absolutely crazy. Both of them get a real great fair share time to shine on this album as well, especially Danny, as always, with his weird ass flow that we all know him for. look, I mean, I'll be honest, and I have to mention, it's not my favorite, but Kingdom Hearts Key, like they basically sample like an anime track or something, and it's like, whoa, like this is so bizarre yet it's so abrasive. I think God Loves You is a really bit of a standout track as well, and so
that has like some gospel vocals in it too,
and yet Danny's like like making all these metaphors to the Bible in like the most like profane way possible, where he's basically saying like I'm gonna be like Moses, I want to part a Red Sea. I was like, oh my goodness, it's incredible. And of course I think the Jack Harlow Combo Meal song is such a great shot at an artist who I think, from my understanding, does not have anywhere near close to the artistic integrity that these two have. And it's very avant jazz, but the way they chop it up, I've never heard anything like it. And I think Danny's verse is especially great. But look, I'm not really huge into the lyrics on this album, so I completely understand the appeal of this. But I like a couple of Danny's albums better than this, like Atrocity Exhibition and You Know What I'm Saying, as he says. But look, I completely get the appeal of this. And also I love, though I don't love the Shut Yo Bitch Ass Up, I love the Muddy Waters part with JPEG Mafia. I think probably his highlight verse on this album. But I don't know, I just can't get into it as much lyrically. But hey, I certainly respect the hell out of the craft, and I think that's why I enjoy this album so much. If this is the future of hip-hop, man, I mean, I'm all for it. I really would love to hear where things go further after this, and I can't wait to listen to more JPEG Mafia after this.
Yeah, it's very adventurous, and I was pleasantly surprised. And unlike the last album we just talked about, I can see why this is held in such high regard, because it's just freaking nuts from start to finish. And like, unlike, a couple episodes ago, I talked about Death Grips, like feeling like I needed to take my brain out and wash it afterwards. Like, this one felt a little like that, but in a good way. I just felt like it was very inventive, and songs like Perfect stood out a lot too. I think that's the one where Danny Brown is saying, okay, I see what you're doing, which when he said that the first time, I kind of felt that way as well. At the same time, I'm like, I see what they're doing here.
Yeah.
I don't know like where they're going with it, but I'm really enjoying it. And also Danny Brown, there's something just really endearing about his voice. Like, some people might find it annoying, but he almost reminds me a little bit of the dude from Cypress Hill in the 90s, who also had like this really weird nasally voice that was,
even though it's a put on.
Like, right, yeah,
which is interesting.
Yeah, so like borderline annoying, but also you kind of love it. So I didn't quite love it. I feel the same way as you. Like, some of the stuff is just lyrically not maybe amazing or anything.
It's impressive, but I'm just not into it. I'm not into it.
Yeah, so enjoyed it, see why it made the list, but probably wouldn't have made mine. But what are you gonna do? So now,
hey, I mean, I was just gonna say real quick, I can't wait to see, because Danny's coming out with another album this year, so I can't wait to see what that. Yeah, he's putting in the work, man. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see. So now at number 64. We Got It From Here. Thank You for Your Service by A Tribe Called Quest. Possibly my favorite hip hop group of all time. Q-Tip, Phife Dawg, Ali Shaheed Muhammad. I mean, come on, man. And
Roby White.
Yes, of course. And I mean, Phife Dawg, rest in peace. They were able to salvage some stuff that they had been working on him with, but he passed before this got completed. And it's just a miracle that they were able to complete it, first of all, and also include him on a good bit of tracks here, probably around half of the runtime. And of course, he's always a standout on tracks like We the People, which I think is one of their best songs, period, throughout their entire discography. Just amazing how it starts out with that doom 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 doom, that bass line, so catchy and
lives rent free in my head, man.
Yeah, man, and the message that they're putting through, which this came out in 2016, right around that election, and man, what a powerful using sarcasm, on that chorus, when they're saying, all you black folk, you must go, all you Mexicans, you must go, Muslims and gays, boy, we hate your ways.
Yeah,
man, it's intense. And when I saw them perform it on SNL, it almost brought me to tears, man, because like when they brought a poster down of Fife and they just walked out of the way when his verse came up, it was a beautiful thing. And Q-Tip, man, he still got it. What a performer. But man, back to the album, the opening track, the Space Program, is great.
So good.
They got a freaking Willy Wonka sample in there. It's it's pretty all over the place. Not as much as the last album we were talking about, but as far as just the amount of guest features on here, it's just like you got people from Kendrick Lamar to Jack White to Kanye, Elton John, Andre 3000. It's just nuts, man. But it just goes to show how many people love this group and was brought up on them and showing their respect to some of the greatest who have ever kicked it. And yeah, I'm so glad this made the list. I think it's at a pretty good spot.
Oh yeah, man. I love this album. Honestly, I would put this on par with their classic albums, being Low End Theory and Midnight Marauders. It's crazy to think, because I don't like Love Movement very much, which came out like 18 years before this, and then they come back and act like they haven't skipped a beat. Quite literally. It's just, Q-Tip is in top form here. I mean, one of the greatest rappers of all time. I think everyone knows that. But as a producer as well, him and Ali Shaheed Muhammad. But Jerobi White, I think, after being absent from like virtually all their albums, my goodness, coming in with killer verses on this album. It's especially on Killing Season, which is one of my favorites and maybe my favorite. But I don't know, We the People is so great. And I just find it ironic that Kanye on that song is saying he can't breathe. That's interesting. But my goodness, this whole thing is just incredible. Songs like Melatonin, songs about black empowerment, of course, as always. And just so many tracks on here that are just classic Tribe, but they bring it into the 2010s in a way that feels so contemporary, but yet so much in their own lane. It really is astounding how well this album stacks up to modern day and to their back catalog. But my goodness, some of the most heartbreaking moments on this whole album, and in just any Tribe record in general, with of course the loss of Phife Dawg here, especially on Lost Somebody on that chorus. It's like, you ever lose somebody and you just hear Q-Tip say Phife, man. It almost brings me to tears, man, when I hear that song, and just knowing what they went through is absolutely heartbreaking, but also so just reassuring that they are able to pull through this tragedy with the loss of one of their most core members, and able to give one final send-off to fans and really cement their legacy in a way that I don't think a lot of hip-hop acts can, because a lot of times they end up on a, like a low note, like Wild Wild by Outkast. Like, it's fine. Kanye, I don't know what to say about him right now. Only time will tell. But these guys really just solidified their legacy and really gave us one of the best hip-hop albums from the 2010s, and probably one of the best albums in this episode. This is awesome. I think this is going to be a classic in years to come, just like the rest of their back catalog from the 90s, man. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, man. Tribe for life, baby. So that is going to bring us to number 63.
I've been roaming around, always looking down at all I see.
Only by the Night by Kings of Leon from 2008. So glad that this made the list. Frankly, I think this should be higher. I think that this is the peak of both their commercial success and their creative powers. Man, what a two-punch opener of Closer and Crawl. Closer being like this moody kind of mysterious song that builds up with Jared Falwell playing this weird kind of whacked out thing on his bass of all things that just keeps the song moving. But man, these guys, I mean, especially at this point, I feel like Caleb Falwell as a vocalist, he kept getting better and better on these first four records, especially, not mumbling as much. You can understand what he's singing on here. But man, the four of them are just really locked in on songs like Crawl. Of course, the big hits on here, Sex on Fire and Use Somebody, which were just everywhere at the time. I actually remember when the album first hit that those first couple singles, I was like, okay, what's going on here? Because like I felt like I was possessive of them as like my band that was like this mid-tier band that no one, like the best kept secret kind of thing. And here they are like going commercial and selling out. But then the more I heard those songs, the more I fell in love with them as well. And then, saw them live on this tour, and just about every song on here I love. Manhattan, Revelry, Notion, Be Somebody is another great rocker. The Closer, Cold Desert is incredible. There's only one or two songs I'm not crazy about on this record, which hold it back a little bit. But to me, this is the Kings of Leon at their best. And I just think they're one of the best rock albums, or rock artists, to come out in this millennium. So glad to see them on the list.
I agree with you that it's their best, but you're not going to agree with me here. I like this slightly more than the Kendrick album, but at least it does not have the lows that this album has. Look, I'm not a huge Kings of Leon's fan at all.
I know, yeah,
but I think that this, I mean, just from the opening, like you said, like as soon as I heard like the synthesizer and Closer, I was like, whoa! I'm like, this is really something different for them, and it feels like an artistic leap in a way that really was a departure from their previous stuff. Because I wasn't a huge fan of Caleb Falwell's voice when he's like doing manic screaming and stuff, but here he really dials it back in and gives some really great vocal lines, especially on Use Somebody. Because when I heard the song and like I've been down and I was like, what? Wait, well, hold on. I was like, I know that I never knew that was Kings of Leon, but that song was all over the place. The fact that I even knew it says a lot. And I think probably the best Kings of Leon song of all time. I really would have to say it is my favorite. And I compare this album to what U2 did with the Joshua Tree. Their transition from War to that album, in a sense that they became such a big arena rock band.
Yeah.
And I also have to mention I love songs like Manhattan as well, which is just a really fun rocker. And I really like a lot of the songs, especially on the first half of this. But I think the fact that this, it almost is like, it is them going mainstream and selling out, but I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Because while it is their most accessible work, I think some of these hooks are so generic and some of the most, like, uninteresting song structures that just get really repetitive by, especially the second half. It's like, none of it's bad. I think especially some of the openings on these songs are quite good. Like, I love the opening on I Want You, and then it just keeps going on. I'm like, oh, it's okay. I don't know. I really feel like this album starts out really strong, but I feel like them going commercial, it's weird because I've never felt this conflicted about someone selling out, and I think you are right. That's what Kings of Leon did, but in a way that it's still, yeah, I mean, it's still my favorite record from them, which isn't, saying a lot from my personal standpoint, but I personally, I don't think this should be on the list, because I know you said you want to I don't think it should be on the list, but if we were to pick any Kings of Leon album, I think it makes sense that this is the one to go with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. I mean, they're not exactly your brand
Yeah.
of rock or whatever, but yeah, I think where I would disagree with you on the second half of things starting to get generic, I think that I can see that in a way as far as like the chord structures, but I think Nathan Followill is such a good drummer that he himself is able to make things more interesting, just like the way that he'll build a song. For example, Manhattan, as you mentioned, like he
Yeah.
keeps get like it gets more and more syncopated as the song progresses. And as well, I think Matthew on lead guitar is an MVP
Oh
here.
yeah, for sure.
Just some of
They're
the
all
tones that he
firing off.
gets, like it's so good. So again, wish it was
Yeah.
higher, but what are you gonna do? So now at number 62, The Glow Part 2 by The Microphones from 2001. This is a indie folk rock darling band that I had never heard of before this countdown, and I listened to it this past week for the first time, and um, you know, I don't see how this made the list, to be honest with you. I mean, I get it, you know, with lo-fi indie stuff, you always want to give at least, I don't know, man. Like I could see what they were maybe going for. They're a little bit in the vein of like a Neutral Milk Hotel, but I think with less of the talent and maybe less of a direction, because this thing definitely goes on a bit too long at over an hour, and there's some a couple songs that are just like instrumentals that don't really go anywhere. I did like a couple tracks on here like The Mansion, and I think Headless Horseman was kind of interesting, but overall I just felt that this was just kind of dull and uninteresting, and I don't get all the critical acclaim, to be honest with you.
Look, I suppose. Well, okay, let me say this before I get into it. I see the user score on this album, and I know a lot of people love it. And I think to myself, okay, I must be in the minority here. I think this is probably the most overrated album of all time.
All
And I've been thinking about this because I somewhat dated myself. I don't know. Each time I go into a new episode, something comes up and it finds a way to surprise me, and somehow this is worse than Earl Sweatshirt. I do not know how. This is the worst album that's ever
I
been
don't
on any
think
of these
it's worse
countdowns.
than Earl Sweatshirt,
Dude, this album is so it drones on and it drones on. And I was looking at a review, a negative review, because believe it or not, there are some negative reviews on this album. And someone said there's 18 minutes of absolutely nothing. Why the fuck am I going to listen to that? And look, I don't know. Honestly, I genuinely want to know what the appeal of this is, because I literally do not understand it. Like, the first song, you start off, I was like, oh, I like what he's doing instrumentally. What's his name? Philip Everlum. And then he was, like, talking about his shirt. He took his shirt off and then he put it back on, and so it was... I don't know. It was like some really like pretentious, weird shit.
Yeah, nothing profound, really. Yeah.
And it started, and I've listened to their first couple albums, and I thought it was a bunch of hoity-toity nonsense then. It was just a bunch of noise and lyrics that just seem like they're deep, but they really don't have much substance to it at all, if you ask me.
Yeah,
and so,
pretentious is a good word for this album.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Oh, this is the crowning king of pretentiousness. I mean, this is just what it is. And I'm just trying to understand what the appeal of this is, because like I get lo-fi music, because the first few tracks, like, you can understand what he's saying, right? And then it gets to a point where you can't understand anything, and then it's just a bunch of like noise. for the sake of noise, I guess. I mean, the instrumentals add absolutely fucking nothing to this. It's like Tree Fingers off of Kid A, but like times 4, probably times 10 on this album. This runs for over an hour long, and this is why. Because at least with some rap songs, it's like, okay, 24 minutes, I'm done with it. This
well,
one,
that's true.
This album literally brought down my night. Like,
Yeah.
and not in the sense where it's like, oh, this is so depressing I can relate to it. This isn't Berlin by Lou Reed, okay? Like, it's just not. And and I think, like, there are a couple of spots that stand out. Like, the Gleam Part 2, there's, like, some steel drums on there that are really distorted, and I really like that. I also thought... honestly, I'm trying to remember what the song was.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, like... I was thinking about this after I listened to this album because, as I said, it might just be me, but I've listened to better lo-fi music that has been influential. And actually, you know, hey, I actually think the album is on your wall there, John. What is it called? In the Aeroplane Over the Sea?
Yeah.
Come on, like, at least because with Neutral Milk Hotel, like, not only is it instrumentally interesting, but it's tight, compact. It has something to say. There's a vocalist that cuts through your ears like a steel knife.
Yeah.
I mean, Phil Everlum is like one of the weakest like vocalists I've heard. Like, not that he's bad, but he doesn't do anything interesting, especially in a style that just meanders into nothing. I really don't understand this at all. I think this album sucks. I think this is the most overrated album of all time, and I really don't see how it's even above Kendrick. I really mean this, because this is a bunch of nonsense as far as I'm concerned. And look, if you guys love this, I don't want to take that away from you. I want to know what you think, because I really don't understand the appeal of this at all. And personally, I do not think this should be on the list. This is not a good choice.
Well, I don't think it's that horrible, but I definitely agree it should not be on the list.
I think it's bad, though.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just kind of like, whatever. So
that too, but it really, it ruined. It made me. The fact that I sit through and listen to this, it really kind of ruined my night for a while. I'm serious. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, that hopefully will bring us to something better at number 61.
Lemonade by Beyonce from 2016. An album that I think was, robbed of Album of the Year at the Grammys, though I don't care about the Grammys that much. But the first appearance of Beyonce on this list, Queen Bee, has arrived. Should be no surprise, but to surprise that it's this low on the list. I'm glad it's above the Glow Part 2. But this, I'd say, besides Mama's Gun, Voodoo, One by the Beatles, I think probably the best, and Cheat Codes, obviously, probably the best album on this list so far. It was in my top 25 on my list, I'm pretty sure, and I think this should be way higher, because I think the cultural significance of this album alone is astounding. Just for the standout single Formation, which is not my favorite song on this album. I'm not as big on like the more trap influenced tracks, though I do love this one. And I think it has to do with she even says in the song, you that bitch when you cause all this conversation. And literally, society changed overnight when this single dropped. Red Lobster sales went up 33%. And then of course the term slay, which was kind of like, a vernacular for the African American gay community, to kind of be like, okay, like you're killing it sort of thing, became basically verbiage used all across America by like everybody. And just how she like flips sexual politics on its head in the song, how she's like saying, he fucked me good, I take his ass to Red Lobster, basically, changing the perception of the man, treating the woman because she, gave him, fed his sexual desires, and how she turns it into this black female power anthem. I think I don't think there are many songs like this that have affected culture in such a way that we have seen, like in such an instantaneous moment in time. and you have to give it credit there. But I think this is by far Beyonce's most conceptual album, of course, dealing with a lot of emotional turmoil from Jay-Z, and basically putting him on blast for cheating on her, and I think the album is very, very consistent thematically, unlike some other albums on this episode, and I really do think it really turns into this deep, powerful, heartbreaking account of a relationship on the rocks, and also as well that's very forward thinking and empowering, and I think musically she's exploring a lot more than she ever had. I mean, her self-titled, of course, was really the start of her exploration, I think, into becoming one of the all-time greats. But my goodness, I mean, you start from Pray You Catch Me, awesome track, Hold Up, Don't Hurt Yourself with Jack White. I mean, every song on here is really solid. Even 6 Inch, I'm as I said, I'm not a huge fan of like the more trap influenced songs, and this one especially, I think, seems like I appreciate the message of it. Like a woman going out and kind of like flaunting their sexuality in a way that's empowering. But even there's elements of that song I appreciate, like the lyrics and the outro, which I think is really, really cool. But Daddy Lessons is probably my favorite song in here. One of my favorite Beyonce songs of all time. It's amazing, like. This is like a country pop New Orleans jazz tune, and when I heard it, it just blew my mind. I didn't know, like, I should have known Beyonce would have done something like this, but really, I think artistically, it's a highlight like no other, and also lyrically, how it's like talking about kind of referencing her father's infidelity, and how he left her family and her mother and her sister, in a way that is almost like it's like a tale of an old Western. And I think she really places not only that emotional standpoint, and how her father can see the predator from a mile away because he sees that within himself, and how that can relate to her relationship with Jay-Z. I mean, even stuff like that, it's very subtle, but it is very, very consistent throughout this entire thing. Sandcastle's another great track. Freedom with Kendrick Lamar with these propulsive like tom drums just going crazy in the background. It's absolutely incredible, which obviously played in her homecoming Coachella performance, which might as well be one of the greatest live performances in history, up there with Freddie Mercury at Live Aid and Jimi Hendrix at Monterey. I mean, just the sets are incredible, everything about it, but really I think one of the most empowering songs, especially in regards to the black community, and Kendrick's verse is just killer. I mean, everything about this album, I just think from top to bottom, it's not like one of my favorites that I put on. It's just outside of my top 100 of all time, but I think that says something, and I think that's, by all the reasons I have said, you can tell how much I love this album, and why I think this is way too low on the list. Culturally significant in every way you can imagine, and should be a lot higher on the list if you ask me.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a solid album. After all that, that's all I'm gonna say. No, I mean, what else can you say? You pretty much said it all. I don't love it as much as you do. It's not one I need to revisit it though.
You should, honestly, man, because it's not better than B-Day. Come on.
I don't know. Like, I get it, like
artistically
for everything that you said, and that musically she was she was experimenting a bit more. I just, like, it's not my go-to Beyonce stuff. But that being said, I am hungry for some Red Lobster biscuits right now.
Dude, those biscuits go so hard, man. And I will say another thing besides how good the biscuits at Red Lobster are.
Yes.
I think, I could understand someone liking her self-titled a bit more, and I know you do. And because I think in some way I probably, they're both like tied for me for all time. Like, they're right next to each other on my all-time list. But I think this one just gets the points just for being more conceptual, and just more, it has a more tight track listing. It doesn't have really that many lows at all, and I just think it's a phenomenal record that is one of the most era defining pieces of work.
Well, great pick, guys. Well, we did
Absolutely.
it. We made it through another episode without killing each other or losing our minds, thankfully. But hey, I promise, guys, the list is going to get better from here. I know we've had some things on here that are kind of, to be honest, duds. Yeah, so on every single episode, I think we've all gotten angry at some point. But hopefully you guys are, I know you're kind of, some of you guys are keeping track of maybe what was on your list and what hasn't made it yet. So hopefully you get at least one on there.
Hopefully not days. 0 out of 10 this time.
Yeah, we'll see. But stick with us, guys, to the end, and we appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Nathaniel's channel, especially here lately. He's been pumping out these Indiana Jones videos and The Room, which you got to check that out if you haven't. Yes. What a celebration of one of the best worst movies of all time. And guys, thank you so much. We love doing this, so we'll see you on the next one.
All right, take it easy now.
With his gun